Hello and welcome to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past and talk about their impact and relevance today. I'm Tim Longer Jr., and I'm joined as always by a man who has finally found the perfect game to practice his cross-examination skills.
Objection! I mean, Brett Duville, Your Honor.
Yep. We're playing Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney.
We are indeed. We
are finally done with our previous 9-episode series in which people clearly were wondering what the heck we were doing.
When is this going to stop? Is this just the podcast now?
Yeah.
18 hours of Republic Commando in? No, we are now putting that behind us until the next major anniversary, I guess.
Yeah, a little self.
We still have dozens of people on the team we haven't talked to, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, sorry about that, folks.
Thank you for indulging us. This is one of the few times we'll be able to have that many guests on about one game, so it was fun to do. So
yeah, but we could not have gone in a more opposite direction.
That is very, very, very true. Yeah, let's. Why don't we make a little bit of an opening argument by talking about the year that this game came out?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. See what I did there?
Of course, you're going to probably do that the whole time. And
I sure am. Yeah, we'll start with a little bit of history. You had the name of the first visual novel and all that, but this did come out in 2001. It's a Capcom game. It originally came out only in Japan on the Game Boy Advance, and then was released in 2005 on the DS here in the West, translated. We will treat it as a 2001 game, however, and I think that's perfectly fine. What was that first ever visual novel? Something from the 80s, I believe you said.
Yeah, I was just kind of doing some really basic research on just the visual novel genre because I know so little about it. Yeah, it's called the Portopia Serial Murder Case. Apparently, is 1983 is considered the first. They did originate in Japan, and the first sort of visual novel format, which was obviously crime scene based. I'm looking at a shot.
Also, I remember it had some weird science fiction elements as well. I think that's what the Portopia.
Oh means. Yeah, it could be. I didn't go deeply into the synopsis.
I read about it a few weeks ago. I mentioned that we had gotten an email about this one, and I mean that was like a couple months ago. And I went and I was like, when did those start? I kind of read a little bit about them at the time, and I remember thinking, oh, okay, well this makes some sense because it's one of the topics I have about
how
these
they
sorts of
combine
games.
that stuff. Yeah,
exactly.
Definitely a cross theme thing. Yeah, and it was a PC game, and largely, I guess, apparently the genre is, as you can imagine, largely PC based. Though we're playing console one, and there are some that have crossed over and been hits on the console. I guess this is a PC 6001 platform. I don't know what PC that is. I don't know if you know what PC that is.
I have no idea.
And it was published by Enix, actually, pre the merger. So yeah. So anyway, so technically that franchise is owned by Square now. So that was sort of the early days.
And you had mentioned last week that you've played some of Hotel Dusk.
Yes, I don't know.
As have I.
Yep. That's
and we don't. Neither one of us remember well enough. I think, other than like, oh yeah, it sort of had this feel and some kind of simple puzzles and. I don't really remember what the key visual novel-y aspects of that one were. It didn't have quite as much as this one does, I don't think. Had more atmosphere, maybe. And then my other one that I wanted to mention, right? Yeah, my other one I wanted to mention specifically was I've played Trauma Center.
Oh, I played that too.
Second Opinion on the Wii.
Yeah, I played the first one, I guess.
Okay, yeah, I played the second one on the Wii, which had sort of detailed surgery. I don't know if the original one probably also had the surgery stuff that you did, but there was a visual novel.
It did, yeah.
It's a visual novel, and then with this kind of surgery, I don't know, mini game, I guess, where you would actually you'd have the story develop, then you'd actually go do the surgery, and then you'd come back. But we'll come back to that in a little while, because I want to talk about the sort of crossing over of themes or the sort of things that they draw on as well. But yeah, that was my other one that when I was sitting playing, I was like, of course I've played one of these before. I just didn't know at the time that you would call it a visual novel. That's something that was definitely a huge blind spot for me for a long time. So,
yeah, and some others that people would probably recognize if they haven't played a lot of these. Professor Layton is listed as one, which I haven't played.
There's a
those.
Professor Layton spin-off to Phoenix Wright, especially. I think that is probably even more so than the normal Professor Layton games are. I
guess the thing that's coming to me now that I guess I should have thought about before is that, obviously, and it actually kind of says that in the visual novel sort of overview, is that it's often hybrids of things, right? So there's a visual novel structure and framework for things, and then you'll have like surgery stuff happening, or in this case, courtroom stuff, right? In Ace Attorney, but in Professor Layton's puzzle related stuff, and then like, for instance, I guess, which I had never played, but Police Knots was listed as in the visual novel.
Oh, sure,
standalone, and so that's an old Kojima game, which I think had action elements, so that would be a combo there too.
Well, I've definitely seen people online only half jokingly say that any sort of modern BioWare game is this.
Right. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
I mean, I would say they're like Mass Effect or something. They're probably a little more developed because there's often a full 3D space you're also navigating, which is not true generally in a visual novel, where the settings you kind of immediately go to places if you move places at all under your player control. So there's kind of lots of things, but I think a lot of the sort of I guess you'd call them companion quests have a lot of visual novel-y kind of aspects to some degree.
Right.
I know that was said when I saw it. Was kind of tongue in cheek, but you definitely could squint and say, you know what, people who want that out of the BioWare games and want like the easy combat and don't care about any of the combat and things like that, kind of want this to some degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they want something a little bit more than this, maybe in terms of the way it's presented, but they're wanting this similar kind of emotional experiences, maybe. So
yeah. Well, in fact, the later Mass Effects, maybe 3 and Andromeda, didn't they have a mode that was essentially like narrative/adventure mode,
only,
where it basically took most of the combat away or made it very easy, and so you were kind of playing just like an adventure game / visual novel. So, they knew people wanted that. I mean, some other recent examples. Looking at just the list for the genre, Doki Doki Literature Club is 2017, and I know that one hit pretty big. Apparently, even 3 million sales. It says.
Well, it was a freebie, Doki Doki Literature Club.
Oh, was it? Okay.
On Steam, so it was very popular right at the end of that year. Everybody was downloading it and talking about it because it was a free short experience, with apparently a pretty big twist that I don't know and therefore can't and won't reveal. Yeah. But I do remember that being a big part of the conversation around that game was like easy to get into, huge surprise.
Go some places.
So
So, I mean, I guess basically we're kind of like educating ourselves on this genre on the fly with playing this game for the series, because it's definitely not something I knew of it, but and I guess I had played the original Trauma Center. When I look back, I can see a similar structure now that I think about it with that Trauma Center. There was romance stuff going on. There was definitely drama within the hospital, right in between this weird surgical minigame stuff. Crazy stuff. So those are the only ones that I really saw on the list that we're mentioning, but worth mentioning. But yeah, it's definitely, I mean, 1983, it's been something of this ilk, and I'm sure that, they were, let's see, 83, I'm trying to think.
Sort of a different style of adventure game to some degree. I mean, you can certainly see at that time also the ability to present anything real time, often would be static images. You consider, Space Quest and King's Quest had a little bit of animation, but they also were around that time. But like even the earlier Sierra games or like the Scott Adams adventure games were very like static imagery.
Yeah.
And you could sort of see this being a different style of static imagery game, where it's like, oh, I present this thing in front of the camera, but there's a background, so I add visual interest by changing out the character you see or something like that. With conversations, you could definitely see that the hardware of that time being appropriate for this style of game and establishing a genre. Just having a different origin in Japan than it had here in the West. So
yeah, or even like the cyan sort of genre of adventure games too, right? Like
sure,
Manhole Before Mist and
right.
Mist as well, but like a little bit later, and then obviously the article references manga and anime, right, as influences so you almost have like a JRPG versus Western RPG, right?
Yep.
They're both RPGs,
sort of parallel,
but they have their own identities and clear sort of like elements that make their DNA different. So you can actually identify, and this is like, these do seem like adventure games, but just a different, with the Japanese
different
origins
slant for sure.
Yeah.
Very, very true. All right, well, let's briefly touch on 2001 in games. It's a year that we've visited quite a few times, as it turns out. Devil May Cry, Ico, GTA 3, Animal Crossing, and Civ 3 were all games that we've covered from 2001. So now I'm starting to think maybe we should branch out. But but it was also the year of Halo. So that was a big one that I threw in there. You had mentioned Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. But I also looked for some specifically Japanese titles out of curiosity of what was, going on coming out of Japan at the time. Other than the ones we played, I saw Final Fantasy X, Onimusha Warlords, which was a PS2 launch window title. I can't remember exactly. Shenmue 2, which was the last gasp of the Dreamcast, I believe. Pikmin was one you threw out there, and then I found another GBA title that I particularly loved from that year, which was, and I know you'll agree with me, Advance Wars.
Oh yeah, that's a great game.
Yep, yeah, terrific game. So a lot of you see the variety of stuff in the industry at the time. I think that's and that's of course the year that Starfighter came out as well. So.
Yep. Yep. Luigi's Mansion. Yeah. Did you mention?
Yeah. So a lot of Nintendo. Yeah. That was a launch title for a GameCube. So it was a big GameCube year.
Yep. Yeah. That pretty much covers it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and also obviously the Xbox launch as well. So.
Right. And I think it's appropriate actually to talk about it, even though I think the Westerners would probably identify the game as more of a 2005 game and a DS, because I do remember it being over here very associated with the DS,
right?
Because it was so appropriate for that platform. But I think, as Brett mentioned in pre-show, I think talking about it as a GBA game is actually pretty important for various reasons that will probably come up as we discuss it, because of what the GBA was as a platform, and how it probably, how they designed it for that platform, how it fit well for that platform, what its limitations might have been, etc. So
yeah, really, in a lot of ways, the limitations are very similar to what a PC hardware would have been in the early '80s, right? And to some degree, maybe not entirely, but certainly a similarly limited platform. A little bit more powerful than the original Game Boy, but not as powerful as the DS with its multiple screens, etc. Yeah, but for sure, I could see those limitations both in cart size, and then also just pure processing and putting stuff on the screen power, and the GBA also being a real limitation. So
yeah, and I think the though it's funny, actually I'm having a memory now just on the fly here that I think I actually had a copy of this game for DS that I might have purchased and never played because it was so popular. and I probably had just gotten a DS. And I was like, what are all the games? What's this Ace Attorney thing? Or maybe I had borrowed it from somebody or something. But I remember having the cart. But what I was going to say is, I feel like now that we've played it, highly appropriate for the Switch, I think, in many ways. But I think on the DS, I don't know what the dual screen aspects were, but it seems very appropriate for the DS as well, with the stylus and stuff. It feels like it would fit that platform quite well. So I could see it being I can see why it would be popular on that as a port on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could see like having the evidence always open on the one of the screens, and tappable, and like being able to look at anything and have this sort of main story stuff going on the other one. Yeah, something like that. I think probably would have been how it might have worked. I never. Yeah, this is the first time I've ever played it at all, or even. I mean, I was aware of it, but had never even like seen it in action. Like, I've seen screenshots, but never on device. So
just memes. Lots of memes.
Just the memes.
For this objection being the obvious one.
Yes, well, since you say that, we should probably start with our major objection, because we have a significant concern, and we don't. It's probably going to be hard to keep it out of clouding our discussion in general, but we'll do our best. But we want to address it first. Man, this game is sexist. Jesus.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. Yeah, it's pretty. I don't know if this is also a challenge with the genre, but yeah, this game in particular definitely does not handle women well in pretty much any facet so far. And it starts, I mean, to be honest, it starts off with the first frame where you see the victim being a woman, and all the victims are women so far that we've played. And then how they're treated and portrayed, is just consistently poor. So I don't know, it's like, to be honest, I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't surfaced as a topic for me before this. Obviously I haven't played it before, but I feel like I know of other games that have not done, have done terribly at this, and somehow
it feels like this one's gotten a pass somehow. And I wonder if that's just a small screen syndrome, like that it doesn't stand out as much because the art is a little bit less obvious, maybe.
Maybe.
when you're looking, well, for us it would have been the DS. I was going to say, when you're looking at a GBA, I don't know that
but it's been ported so many times.
It really has, yeah.
Phoenix Wright himself, I think, is like in Smash Brothers, and he's one of Capcom's, not one of their top tier characters, but it's a franchise kind of died out. But they had multiple sequels. I mean, it kept going.
Yeah. I mean, it's a trilogy. Yeah, they were on the Switch. Yeah.
And I think there were spinoffs as well. So I don't know. We have to talk about it. And there were a couple moments when I felt in such a way where I was a little bit like, well, should we keep playing this game? Because I was so upset about it. But we wanted to at least address it and call attention to it. That it has to be kind of stated. There's definitely lots of stuff to talk about from the game's design specifically, and I'm sure its impact on lots of other stuff. But let's make sure that its impact in this way is not something that creates a legacy. As we're trying to.
Yeah, because I mean we talked about pre-show, just like the first time you even see your mentor, where you're like, oh cool, a female character who's this powerful woman, but then she's dressed in a bustier, and you're like, what? Like, I mean, it's just like, this is not like, it's just kind of a mess tone wise as far as women go. And it was, I mean, it is, distracting is a good way to put it. And not in the way I think they meant it to be. Certainly for me anyway. I just was like, are you kidding me? At a number of points. And yeah, I don't really know what to say other than that. It's not, we do want to talk about a lot of the design elements, which we both agree are pretty interesting and strong. So we'll talk about that. But we definitely wanted to. We've definitely had another game in the past which rubbed us the wrong way from the beginning, and we kind of let that color all of our conversation. And maybe we need to. We definitely need to see the other side of this game as well, having learned from that experience. So, yeah. Anyway, let's move on from that to kind of talk about where, in part, that may have come from. You had pointed out that it was, there were a lot of stereotypes in general in the game, which I think probably relates to its development, and also to allow them to sort of lean on that a lot, lean on stereotypes to just get you in the headspace quicker, right? So that they don't have to do as much work on the screen to describe characters. I think that's generally why stereotypes are used, right? I mean, they are, archetypes would be, I guess, the more kind way to say it. There are a lot of stereotypes and archetypes going on in this series. I mean, I actually thought also that the first killer was also like really the guy with the mole in the center of his forehead, right between his eyebrows. It was like, man, that's on the nose, even though it was on his forehead. So
yeah, and I think pretty much. I mean, there's some, to be honest. Maybe other than Phoenix himself, every character has something that we could pick apart from a stereotype, like a poorly executed stereotype perspective. If I'm honest, the sexism is the worst part of it, but I made notes about everybody, but we don't have to dwell on that. But the sort of like the development side of that for me, and the reason I put the note down is I think from a fidelity perspective in art / animation, and then the way that the writing is implemented, with when it comes to how deep they can go, when it comes to how much text is on screen, how long the conversations are, which are obviously not very long, they're short, how many options you have to talk to them, and whether that's, like Brett said, memory concerns or other reasons, or just design choices. If I were to use like a completely opposite counterexample of a very similar sort of motif, you look at something like the tech that was developed for LA Noire, where subtlety in conversations when in interrogation was part of the point. They have none of that in this game. There's no subtlety you can get when you're trying to essentially interrogate or question people or talk to people. And so they kind of had to boil characters down to their most core basic kind of concept to get any tells from or information from them in the context of solving a mystery, or getting to figure out what what they're saying that is a lie, versus like something like LA Noire, where you're looking at facial expressions and you're trying to read the subtlety of it, which you get in a movie, right, in a TV show. But it just felt like, I think I put the note down because it felt like almost, and this is by no means me justifying their decision, but it felt like a necessity for what they were trying to do. And it kind of dawned on me all throughout, that there's like, well, is this required for getting the sorts of, because it's a puzzle game at the end of the day. And if you're looking for clues or tells or, whatever, not in their facial expressions per se, but just in the basics of how the characters are constructed, then maybe those stereotypes are important. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that.
Yeah, I suspect it's kind of some of column A, some of column B, some production reality, and some like shortcut to deliver the to focus on the puzzle aspects, right? To boil away a lot of detail that might be lost on a small screen, and B, they might simply not have had the sort of budget. I mean, it might have been a bit of a flyer as well,
Yeah, and it might have been, and some of it probably was a choice, right? Because it's the genre as well as
it comes
based on manga kind of motifs and things.
Yeah,
like
and
that.
as we also talked about and didn't mention in sort of the history, like there's a lot of dating sim games that are in this kind of framework, where you're trying to romance the particular hot woman that you want to romance in the game, or hot boy for that matter, because there are those as well. Dream Daddy is basically one of those, kind of subverting a lot of the tropes in some ways. But yeah, I mean, it's so there's a lot of places it could have come from, and probably it comes from all of them to some degree. If they're trying to establish some new sort of game, they're probably trying to. I think a lot of their time and effort went into the gamification of law, and trying to figure out how that structure would work. So.
Yeah, so we don't have to, there's not too much. We can probably, as characters come up, we can talk about them, but I don't think we have to talk too much more about the stereotype theme anymore.
Yeah. But yeah, let's talk about like the overall structure maybe of the first case, because it is fairly simple. That's why I made us play 2 in the beginning, because I knew the first one was going to be pretty tutorial-y. So
and one day of
one quick thing. No real investigation to speak of. Like you don't go anywhere. You're just really doing the courtroom mechanics. So they're surfacing those new mechanics. Some of them, anyway, the courtroom interactions that you're going to see throughout the game, and then they'll kind of grow them over time in ways that I thought were interesting, I guess, so far. But the first thing is basically like, okay, well, you have the evidence, right? And they're entering evidence in as the prosecution starts to press their case, and you have these witnesses on the stand. So who's our first witness?
Our first witness. Wow, why am I blanking on who the first?
It's Larry.
Oh, it was Larry. It was Butts.
Larry/Harry.
Okay,
yeah.
Before we get into the courtroom, though, I want to mention one thing about the structure of the game that I like about it is it shows the crime right away in each of the cases.
Oh, true. Yeah,
you see what happens, and you see the killer.
Right.
So it's sort of, which I did not expect. And when you look at the weird counterexample that I used of LA Noire or something, where it's much more who is the killer. You know what I mean?
We can argue offline about how subtle that game is, but yeah.
No, that's fine. I was trying to think of
I know what point you were trying to make. Yeah, you were trying to like subtlety of performance really
comparatively, is it's not subtle in the truest sense, but comparatively to this, it's trying to do something more. But anyway, I don't think any game really has succeeded at sort of like cinema or TV subtlety.
Yeah, you're right. I had not made the note about seeing the killer at the beginning, but that is true that both times you see that.
You're kind of waiting, right? In a way, and this is way overthinking the design, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. In a way, because you know who it is right off the bat as the player, you know who you need to press further and further to get beyond. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like dramatic irony, right? You know more than the characters, than the characters that you play, right? So, and that's a really good technique. I mean, it's very common in mysteries, right? A really well-written mystery is a mystery in which you figure out who the killer is roughly 3 pages before the before the guy in the book does, right? Because you finally, like, enough evidence falls into place where you feel smart that this happened, but you can't really necessarily, you might try to structure a game like this like that, but instead what they're doing here is saying, this game is not about figuring out who did it. This game is about using the tools you have to get to the answer, right? To get through the story. Instead of having to branch the story based on what you do, other than failure, success, failure, what they're really doing is saying, look, you're trying to get here. it to X. The X is clearly mapped on the map. What isn't mapped is the route to X, and that's what you need to figure out.
Right. Yeah, and I think it relates to a topic we might get to this time, or we might get to next time, just sort of like about the Japanese, legal system, but also, I think from a game design perspective, it's actually, like you just said, it's a critical. What it made me realize is it's actually critical for the structure of the game, because, and the fact that you just brought up the mysteries as another example. This isn't a mystery. This is literally like a courtroom, law and order kind of procedural or something, where it's all about that process. And right. I liked not having to, because basically from a game design mechanical perspective, when you're talking to a witness that is there to further the information and testimony, and obviously you already know they're not the murderer, but if somebody in the room is accusing them of being the murderer, which does happen in the second case, it's incorrect. So you just have to dig deeper into how to subvert that. You know what I mean? And
right. Well, it happens in the first case as well, because the second witness is the killer.
Right.
He supposedly witnessed Larry wandering off, after having killed Cindy.
Cindy Stone.
Cindy Stone,
yeah. Yeah. Right. I forgot the order of those, but and sort of like, because you know who it is, your goal ends up being, how do you get the murderer on the stand? Right. What I mean? It's like, I just have to find the flow chart in the puzzle game, adventure game, to get to that person, which ended up being the case in the second one. Cause you're like, I know none of these people are that guy, cause he's pretty memorable. But anyway, for the first, so we see the murder, we see the murderer, and then, and then you're in the court, I guess.
More or less. You start outside just with like, hey, it's, some story setup of like, hey, it's your first day. You're meeting Mia, your boss, the character of your boss for the first time in the game, and going into the courtroom. And she's sort of there to advise you as you take on that first case as a tutorial kind of case. So you're not seeing as many of the things you're going to see in the second case, where the structure grows out a little bit, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But you do basically go in, you see like, okay, what's going to happen is the prosecutor is going to present a thing. We're going to see it, see that story in order. See that a number of questions or a presentation in order, and then we will cross-examine that very same statement or series of statements, right. Which is actually a really kind of nice structure, I have to say. I really like once through, you're able to examine evidence at any point and just kind of look and say, could this bear on this statement? So you have that time to do that. Mm-hmm. I actually wonder, and maybe somebody could write in and point this out, but I wonder if the ability to go back, to scrub back and forth through your cross-examination might be a modern update for the Switch. Like whether originally the first presentation of it is when you're supposed to figure out when you're going to want to do the things.
Ooh, yeah, that'd be rough. A lot more saving would happen then.
Well, I don't think they had the saving as well. I know the saving is an addition. I think this was a game where you spent a lot of time redoing things. Sort of like, actually, to mention another mystery game, the old Infocom text adventure, Deadline or Witness, either one. Deadline being the first one, where you had to play the whole game multiple times effectively to figure out what the evidence was in order to, because it happened over the course of 24 hours, and it played out in so-called real time, which is to say, whenever you moved, time advanced. Whenever you put something into the parser. So if you moved to a space, you were at a place. Yeah, you could be at a place and miss a clue because it's happening across the map, and you didn't know to go there. So you had to play multiple times to pick up like where you should do things. And I think this game may have been like that. And with only 3 cases, that sort of makes I think 3 or maybe 4 cases in the original. I think that might be partly why. Anyway.
Yep, that would definitely make a difference, because I think the scrubbing back and forth during cross-examination, for me, is one of my kind of favorite moments of that exploration phase. But
Right.
But anyway, continue. Yeah, so we see the testimony of the current witness, and like you said on the DS, I wonder too that if on the bottom screen you could actually, it's silly that we don't know this, but I wonder if you could actually look at the evidence while they're talking in a way, you know what I mean? Because it's just maybe accessible there. So that'd be even cooler as far as like, it's kind of simulating.
Yeah, like considering the evidence before you while the guy's talking and taking notes. Like you see this in law drama all the time, right? It's like, oh, somebody sits up from the front row of the galley or something and whispers to the attorney, like, oh, you gotta know, like the detective has come in and is passing some new evidence or whatever. You have all of that sort of stuff going on of like, oh, here's some new evidence that you can use to contradict what that person just said. But fundamentally, what you're looking for at this point is contradictions between what is being said and the actual evidence, physical evidence that you have, the hard evidence, as it were, which is everything from autopsy notes to the murder weapon, or, gosh, what are some of the others in the first case? Her passport, kind of a red herring one.
Yeah, timing is usually a thing.
Yeah, timing was, well, yeah, the passport's not entirely a red herring because it does kind of indicate why something happened the way it did.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's actually just more informs what's going on. So yeah, you're kind of doing all of that. And then my favorite was Phoenix Wright carries an attorney's badge.
Yeah.
No one would believe I was a defense attorney if I didn't carry this.
My original intro for you is going to be something about the badge because I thought it was so funny. But
it really is.
You always have the badge on you, so I wonder. It's funny. I wonder if that's going to come up in some case at some point where you're like, good thing you have this badge.
Like they take away your badge, or
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that rhythm is really cool, and I think that once you get into the cross examination, and you're actually actively, they essentially in cross examination, there's one sort of key addition to the verbs you have there, and that is the pressing. Press, is that what they call it? Pressing verb?
Present in the first case. It's the second case that adds the pressing.
Oh, okay. All right.
So in the first case, it's purely the presenting a piece of evidence from your list of evidence, so which contradicts the statement that you're hearing. So, when the guy says, "Oh, hey, I must have heard the television say it was 1 o'clock."
Yeah.
Then you can present the evidence. Well, the power was out.
Yeah. So they just have one thing they're trying to have you do. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I really liked about that was it basically, it sort of had the feeling of like, oh, no, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It almost feels more like a police interrogation to some degree. Like I could see the police interrogation version of this game, which is very similar, where somebody's correcting their story again and again, and you're trying to corner them, which might also bear on the Japanese legal system, because it is so. As we talked about pre-show, there's a lot about that we've sort of heard, and neither one of us are experts, so we certainly don't want to go into huge amounts of detail about it, but that it is highly confession driven.
Yes.
And they have a very high conviction rate, and almost all of it comes as a result of people pleading to the fact that they pleading guilty.
Yeah. There's like something like 98%. Their crime is obviously lower, but it's like their conviction rate is like 98, which it's basically the opposite of ours in so many ways. It's very efficient. They even mentioned in one of the cases we played for the session that the trials are usually a day or days. And which is not the case here too. And so however they have figured out to do this, I think part of it sounds like that I've heard is that they're the preparation and the way that they go into the case is different than the way that we do it too. So
Right.
there's a lot of pre-work that's done to get to the state where the trials, are shorter because they've done a lot of, of that prep. And I guess they also don't apparently, I forgot to mention this to you in pre-show, but I think apparently they also don't go to trial unless they're absolutely, sure. And as opposed to our system where, they want to be sure, but they can go in with some,
as long as they have a reasonable argument for that.
Yeah. Reasonable doubt. Right. And there's certain things that our system that people, I don't want to say take advantage of, but it's like there's reasons to still go to trial in our system that I don't think the Japanese system actually even does at all. They avoid it. So I want to say it sounds more efficient, but it's also like, how did they achieve that? It's such a
yeah, it's a smaller society. It's a more homogeneous society.
Mm-hmm. There's lots of
the origins of their government and legal style are different, right? Yeah. I mean, I think there's also more power in the state to some degree, right? Which means the little guy really can't fight City Hall to some degree. So I think there's a lot of difference.
No, there is.
Yeah, we are not by any means, not even a little bit, experts on anything like that.
No. No, it's just fascinating. The only reason I bring it up, and I think we shouldn't delve too deeply into it because we can talk about it really intelligently, is this is clearly they're gamifying the legal process, right? At least the courtroom part of the process. And so, you to do that, you have to start with some sort of structure and understanding and sort of like what verbs are there going to be and what's the flow going to be, right? And so anytime anything is gamified for, something that doesn't naturally lend itself to a game, anytime that is done, it's intriguing to me to see how you break that down, right? How they chose to break it down into what pieces, because they obviously leave a lot out because it didn't fit in the game or they didn't want to fit in the game. And so they chose certain pieces that I think in the flow is really interesting. And as we talked about that structure, even of the first case, but I think it also kind of creates some fun drama, right? And like presentational aspects that make
and pacing as
and
well.
Pacing. Yeah. And the music is hilarious. I think is something I wanted to mention too. Just like, it's just so perfect for, it feels like, I used in pre-show, I used the fighting game comparison. I actually just thought of a better comparison. It almost feels like the turn-based combat in a JRPG or something, where, you're going back and forth, and then there's like an objection comes, and then it's almost like you're the objections and the pressing, and when you present evidence is almost like a spell you cast or something, you know what I mean? You're like,
right.
or like a punch, and the music really matches that, and then, there's obviously like when he yells objection, it's almost like Ryu casting a fireball.
Right. Yeah.
So, which
Hadouken!
Yeah, is ironically Capcom as well. So, So anyway, we're presenting in the first case, evidence to contradict the killer's story, who conveniently was there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and he kind of had to be there.
No, I know, but I mean, he said he was conveniently there.
Right. He said, yes, he had an alibi for why he was there, which was a front. So, I mean, I find although the case itself is pretty thin as far as that goes, it is enough it's like one of those, it's like those riddles of like, a man's found hung in a empty room. There's no chair. There's no whatever, but there's a puddle on the floor, right? Like it's a very stripped down story, to take away all the distractions. Although they throw in some things that feel a little red herring-ish, like the fact that this woman, had multiple sugar daddies, like, normally that would be stuff that comes up in the course of the story, like that you have to, like, the idea that all this stuff is coming up in the courtroom and is being first heard there is like odd, but is what generates the drama. And that's not uncommon, like in a law show or or something like that, in like LA Law or something like that in the, I guess, late 80s, early 90s. I'm sure I know there have been legal dramas ever since, but I stopped watching a lot of television in the 90s, so I don't often know.
I think Law and Order is probably
Law and Order, but of course Law and Order has a full, well, I guess, it gets more to be more like that, although of course, you're the defense attorney running around doing the investigation in the, in the second case. I guess maybe we could talk about the way that they elaborate the structure, in terms of what you're doing and how they basically add new modes in that second.
Yeah,
in that second
we should
case.
Move to the second one anyway.
Yeah, we'll do that, and then we'll probably cut it there and move to a few pieces of feedback we have. So, so the second story, which has kind of a lot, and I have another objection that I want to throw in when we talk about the second one. But you want to present it a little bit in terms of the changes?
Yeah, well, I mean, I already revealed one, but I think that one of same structure as far as like the overall flow. You immediately see the crime happen, thus the murderer as well. But in this case, they directly related to characters you've already been introduced to, which is your chief of the agency you work, or the law office that you work for, Mia. And so she's actually the one who's killed. Again, some unfortunate, anyway. And then that kind of reveals, a bunch of different things, pieces of information that come from that, including her sister, who you actually are the big difference. And I don't know if this ends up being the case for all of them. It would be funny if it were, but in this one, you were pretty much at ground zero during this case, meaning you're the one that's there that finds the body with the sister. And so Phoenix Wright is actually kind of easily integrated into the facts of the case, which I think changed this one quite a bit because you were there,
right.
Phoenix was there and witnessed stuff. So
it also increases the stakes, right? So.
Yeah. No, it was good for drama, and you can totally see why they did it, right? Because this is your mentor, and she was one that was killed. So it was cool.
And also you end up being the main suspect.
Yeah. Yep. And so, but of course, you just like the other one, you see the criminal right away, and so who you're looking for. You just haven't found them yet. But the structure does, change in some ways, in that you are introduced to the investigation mode, which I had forgotten. I knew about the courtroom stuff, but I had forgotten that there was this in from whatever screenshots or videos or people telling me. So that was kind of cool to be introduced into that. And that's literally, a hunt, pixel hunt kind of situation where you're just moving around the screen, and then you get... And
what I will say about that I do really like is you can start to come up with a theory of the crime already, or of something else, like if you're in some other environment, like what's going on here, why am I here, and things like that I really like.
Mm-hmm. They're choosing locations for some reason, so it's like I should dig deeper into these, and you can't go literally everywhere, but they give you enough, I think, to give you some things to form theories or some red herrings, or what's important about this, that, or the other thing. And it's got nice little check boxes when you find something or rule something out. Yeah. So the investigation mode is one part of it. And then there's a little bit, I would say, a little bit deeper questioning mode that happens when you talk to people before the court case starts, right? So you can go to each locations and usually talk to somebody there. So there's a little bit of dialogue tree stuff that gives you some more information, and occasionally evidence pops up from that. They do some funny things where, like, the lawyer is the one finding these pieces of evidence here and there and brings them to court with him, and nobody else knows that he has them or something.
He's a defense attorney. He's allowed.
Is that how that works? I don't know. I thought that all
The state is required to provide evidence to the defense,
everybody,
as in the process of discovery, right? So that, I mean, that's why sometimes there will be mistrials granted on the basis of, well, the state had this information and didn't give it to the
okay,
the
I thought that went both ways. I did not know the defense.
It does not. It does not go. There's no burden on the defense to present information, because that's self-incrimination, possibly.
Got it.
So there's no burden on the defense to reveal anything until they can pop it up in trial, and that's often used in the dramas too.
Got it. Yeah. I just know.
That's why the more expensive lawyers are more expensive, because they're going to spend the resources to go dig up everything they possibly can on everybody that might come in, right? So that's why that's why our legal system has some problems with who has the money. So
right, yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So I never put two and two together on that, or didn't know. So yeah. So that's appropriate. But so that is very appropriate for you going around to these scenes and finding wiretaps and things like that. But then I mean, once you get to the first day and you're in the courtroom, the structure, the main thing that's added there, which I mentioned earlier, is the pressing mechanic, right? So when you're going through cross-examination, with each sentence that you can scrub through as they go, you can go backwards rather once they go forward, you can actually press each of their statements, sometimes rattling them a little bit, sometimes trying to push them or stress them out,
or reveal something that you can present contradictions in. Yeah.
It's generally, it seems like flow wise, you're going to want to press every single sentence that they have. Maybe that changes over time, and
I wonder if I've been wondering like how these things are going to develop into the next case, because it's sort of like here it seemed like because there is a cost, and we didn't talk about this, but if you present contradictions where there isn't one, he'll sort of say, he'll present the evidence and say, well, what about this? And the judge will go, I don't really see how that's a problem. And you have a sort of meter, similar to a health meter in the upper right of the screen at that point, which will tick down a little bit, and apparently, although I didn't push it this far, just for time, and I might next time. But that seems like it can, so you can take it down to basically end the game at that point, or fail the case. Yeah.
Yep. I got down to, before you had suggested I save liberally, I got down to one last, bit, where I could just fail one more time. So I had saved, so I finished with that, but I did, just to see what would happen. Yeah. Finish, make a wrong accusation. And then it basically, just says, you're done, and they're going to jail. And so in my case, it was Maya, right? She was convicted. So,
no. Ouch.
Yeah. I think that was, it was that phase of it. So then, the other thing that they add, so they have the pressing, which reveals moments where you can, like Brett said, present that stuff. You can still present evidence as you did in the last one. And so that's all combined. But then the additional thing that they do is they multi-phase it, in that they have multiple days. So
right
after you successfully rule out the first suspect, but you still don't have, the right person, then they say, well, we'll come back to trial the next day. And that gives you time to go back to locations and do some more investigating, talking to people, and then hopefully eventually reveal and find the real suspect you want and get them on the stand, which was the case in the second one. Red, White.
Yes.
The Blue Corp. Wow. That's the character. There's something the one thing I will say is as far as like gaining the upper hand with these, with on them, and like really like zeroing in on getting the confession, it's so gratifying. They did a great job, I guess I'll say, with the men.
Well, I mean, he's archetypically cartoonishly evil.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and everything's stacked against you. He owns everything, right? He's, it's
yeah. What I was going to say,
when I say cartoonishly evil, I mean like in every dimension. This guy is
yeah.
cartoonishly evil.
Douchebag, yeah. No, what I was going to say is actually the gratification you get from seeing them break down.
Yeah,
And the way that because they have very limited, frames for their animations, and they have very limited states of their personality. So it's like, and they return to these obviously because of the art they had or whatever. And it's probably part of the charm, right? Of like, how many states of facial expressions they have, and sort of
right. Well, they do good things. You can see how it would fit on a GBA. Okay, they don't change anything about the character except one eye, which is probably a sprite, that is just placed over the top of it, rendered last, and they'll make that thing twitch, which they did in the first case as well. But yeah, it's really satisfying, to see people start to. It gives a lot of character to what you will see in a legal drama of like the person on the stand who's fidgeting, the actor, portraying the character will be, you can tell something, and that I guess is some of the things you were talking about that they were going after with LA Noire. So
yeah,
it's here just in such a resource limited way.
Yeah. And Edgeworth, your kind of like nemesis prosecutor, is similar in that he is this, very ego driven, just like schmarmy, undefeated, right? He's never lost a case or something, and he kind of presented it as this legend, very veteran. And then he's just so cocky the whole time, and then also to see him, you have that moment when he shifts to, he's hunched over, his hands on the table, he gets the frown, and he's like, oh, I haven't seen the cocky guy, frowning like that. And it's like, oh, I'm really doing well. I've got the most badass prosecutor on the road.
And that does that aspect between your two, main lawyers does have a fighting game sort of feel.
Yeah, that's
like you have those moments where it's like, oh, he's totally on the ropes, right? But then he like digs deep and comes up with some other inner resource and like is like, aha, but that doesn't mean, and he comes up with some counter argument, some loophole in what you've said, and that works really, really well. That stuff. There's that push and pull.
There's even some, when you get over a certain threshold, they have that close-up shot too of each of them, right? Where they have the scrolling background, it's very much
the pacing, and it becomes very manga-esque,
Yeah. And so it does feel, and obviously the font and the artwork is very fighting game, and some of those like combo. It looks like a combo, right? Like you just in the way that the audience wants us to talk about combos. It looks like you just did a fighting combo, and when they put the big graphical words on screen, right, for the combo, to execute. So yeah, I'm surprised by all that stuff and delighted. It's just unfortunate that it's through this haze that I'm playing in, but I do see the appeal.
Can I throw my other haze out there now?
Oh yeah. What's your other one?
Because we didn't even talk about it in pre-show, but I remembered, thinking about Trauma Center. And I don't know to what degree this is going to be true of this one. And I know, like, from the little bit of research we did, like, this is part of the history of the series, of the genre, rather. But the supernatural elements, to me, are just like, I don't need those. Like, in Trauma Center, you're like, I don't know, you have some mystical power that that you unlock, you basically at some point unlock, and you can do these special things on the screen to like use your special power or whatever. And the magic stuff, like, I just don't need. And I want to say, like, the at least 40 plus years of primetime television I'm aware of as far as hospital and legal dramas go doesn't need is the supernatural stuff. Like, I don't know. It's always weird to me that it's like, oh, and magic. And I'm like, really? I mean, ask me about the Supreme Court game that I, have designed in my back pocket, if anybody's got a couple million. Like, I think there's enough drama in these systems in and of themselves, like, that I don't know. That's an objection I've had to the few things that I've seen in this genre where I'm like, really? I mean, I didn't need that, anyway.
Yeah.
I just want to throw that out there because it is a thing that I came into. I was like, "Are you kidding? Again?" is what I said. I was sitting on the couch again. Another one of these, in this kind of game.
Well, I think it is like we talked.
Yeah,
about.
I think it's a historical.
It is a thing with the genre.
That's part of it.
And there's also horror sub genres for virtual novels and stuff too. But not only that. I mean, like you're right for the most part, but there actually have been a few popular, even in the West, TV shows that have some of that stuff going on.
Oh yeah,
and one of them is even called Medium, I think. So
right,
so it's that kind of like.
I mean, and some are magical thinking as well, like Profiler or whatever, where she, where she can she puts herself into the mind of the person, or like, I don't know, wasn't there one called Numbers? I mean, that's
That's not
I
exactly.
guess it's more of a police procedural. It's not exactly the same, but yeah. I mean, there's always just yes, there are those as well, but also there's just like, I don't know, in games it seems like it's always there. I'm talking out of my behind as far as that goes because I really don't know this well enough, but it seems like the popular ones. It's like, oh, and then there's magic. And I'm like, anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's already wacky enough game in so many ways that I guess it didn't have the same effect on me because I was like, oh, of course I didn't, other than some of the creepy things they do with that concept, with the sisters.
Gross.
Pretty gross, but yeah. So your mentor returns in a medium form and talks to you from the grave. Yeah.
Yep.
And
now I'm curious, like, is that going to happen again? And maybe, who knows? I just thought it was a lot. Well, we should probably
we'll have
approach
more.
The bench maybe, and
okay, all right,
and maybe get some feedback. I'm trying.
Mm-hmm.
Trying pushing, or maybe at this point it's more of a sidebar. Sidebar, Your Honor.
Okay. Let's sidebar this.
We'll play.
I demand a recess.
We'll take a recess. We'll play to the galley a little bit, and maybe we'll just come back and do some feedback after a break.
Sounds good.
Back from the break, we actually have I think a fairly brief review and a few emails this time. So let's get right on to those. You have that first review, which was a Apple Podcast review.
Okay. I'm not sure if it got cut off, but I'll just read as what I have here.
I read to me as if it got cut off. So yeah, Sam Spot, I think it was. If this is not as all of it, go ahead and send it, and we'll read the rest of it in the future.
Okay, or it could just be I'll see what it says here. Subjects for the review: must-listen show for players, developers, and gaming historians. Oh my, historian! I don't know. From Sam Spot 101, fantastic podcast for anyone interested in the history of video games, aspiring developers, or someone simply looking for recommended games to play and think deeply about, not only to Brett. With no punctuation at the end. So
I don't know if that was meant to be like.
I would like to think that that's just a Brett joke.
I think maybe he was just saying, no, I'm not just complimenting Brett here.
Okay. Good.
Which is how I tend to take things, So,
yeah, right. Yeah.
I sometimes say, well, one of us thinks deeply,
right.
The sort of thing I would say. So maybe he's trying to cut that off the pass.
That makes sense. Thank you, Sam Spot. Very, very kind to say that historians would enjoy because I don't know. I feel like we're bad at that part, but thanks for the review.
Well, maybe the interviews.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, there's a bit of time capsule-y kind of going nature to what we're doing too. So
yeah, for sure.
Totally get it. Yep. What about you? Would you
yeah, so I don't have a review. I've got the first of our emails. This was sent to devgameclub@gmail.com, and I realized, Ben, last week I said your last name wrong again. It's Zaug, not Zug. So apologies, Ben from Iowa. The subject is "Don't read until Ace Attorney played," and in his first sentence is, "Seriously, Brett, don't read this until you finish this week's assignment." Because he didn't want to ruin anything for me. And then he had a bunch of spaces so that I wouldn't accidentally read it. He says, "I'm committed to playing this game with the podcast. It will be my first attempt at doing so, and I already finished the first week. I've not played this game since I found it at GameStop in 2007, and it made me consider law school. DGC has now given me a reason to replay this. I have to say that the updated graphics look so nice on PS4. I actually didn't realize it was also there. This looked pretty good on DS, but I was not expecting this to stand out. I never considered this a visual novel, but an adventure game, because you have to find clues and use them to solve puzzles. Having played 999 and Danganronpa 1, though, I realized that it is, and I like visual novels much more than I realized. I have one gripe so far. During the wiretap cross of Red White, he says he was there in early September, a week before the murder. The murder was September 5th, and the game won't let you contradict him on this. Not sure if you guys noticed that a week before September 5th can't still be September. Thanks, Ben from Iowa Zog. P.S. Thanks for the Kingdom Hearts update." So, yeah, I also felt a little weird about that whole date thing. I made a note about it.
The margin is too small there. Yeah,
it should be like the 15th or something like that. I found that super strange as well. That one felt like maybe a localization translation issue, like it might have literally been the 1st, but in Japanese, like the 1st of September, but in Japanese maybe that's ambiguous or something like that, and it wasn't translated that way. Like I don't know.
I feel like this has been remade and ported so many times.
Yeah, it should have been fixed at some point.
They could have done a pass, but yeah, I'm sure this trilogy did okay, especially on Switch. So yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. No, I'm sure it did too. Yeah, it is weird. I agree. That one definitely. There were a couple things that I was a little pet peeved about.
It's not perfect in some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Because it can throw you off, right? You can think that you have one thing happening, but it's not true.
Yeah, I mean there was also like we didn't talk about this, but I had a similar sort of thing with like the fact that there was this murder and it was seen from a lit hotel room across the way into a dark room on the other side. Mm-hmm. That's not the way that works.
Right. Yeah.
It's the opposite.
Yeah. Right,
that you can see into the other room. Yeah. So I was also like, although I guess maybe that light was broken, but I wanted to use that as a contradiction. Like, no, the room was dark.
Yeah.
Like, so there's several times where I'm like, there's broken glass. So clearly the lamp was broken, so you couldn't have seen it. Right.
Yeah.
And, so I had lots of little things like that where I was like, okay, this isn't what the game wants me to do. I'm bringing too much knowledge or something, to the game. It's definitely the sort of thing where, I've written some of those, murder dinner parties in the past and just for family. And you run into that inevitably, especially with a large number of like suspects or amount of evidence or whatever, that like not everything quite fits together. Like, so I have to try to let that go. But I'm glad that I'm saving a lot because I'm definitely going back and being like, oh, right. Okay. So it's not picking up what I'm putting down. So I just got to ignore that and move on.
Yeah. I mean, it's the traditional adventure game problem, right? Where it's like, what do they want you to do? Can, if they've set the world up in such a way where it's believable enough where you're making conclusions on your own, that's probably generally a good thing, but it also comes with the problem of, well, that's not the answer. So it's like,
right.
That, and that happened to me multiple times too. In fact, I think I might've even gotten stuck at one point because I was convinced on something that wasn't true. I was like, well, I thought it would have been this, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
So so
yeah, I had a moment of that with the April May cross. I
Yeah,
think,
the
where
same.
I was stuck, and I was like, "What is going on? What is the
I'm
thing that it
sure it was the
wants
same
me to do?"
spot.
I bet it was the exact same bit of
Yeah.
data. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mentioned to Brett in pre-show, and I won't talk too much about it, but my wife and I are playing Hunt a Killer, which is this subscription-based sort of like Brett's description was good. It's sort of like escape room in a box kind of thing, but it's about finding the the killer. And so it comes with trinkets and, notes and puzzles and all sorts of fun stuff. And same thing though, like we're reading the autopsy report and we're like, this is it. It must be it, and it has nothing to do with what they want you to do.
Right.
But we like spend, 30 minutes trying to figure out what this whole one little sentence meant when it has nothing, so it's, it means it's believable, which is cool, but it also means it's hard for them to present the right stuff to you at the right time.
Right. I mean, that's a common problem with these sorts of games generally, right? Is like, how do you make it so it's not just everything's important, so everything has to fit in exactly. I mean, I guess that's one way things go. Like adventure games typically do that, but lean into like the humor for a LucasArts game, like we talked about with Day of the Tentacle.
Yeah,
everything matters. There might be some weird things but you are finding what the designer wants you to do with it. But it's also like leading into the comedy. So you want whatever's wackiest generally, right? Here I think it's more wanting the sort of, it's going after the aha moment a little bit. So like for a long time, I was devoted to the fact that, May and Maya are one letter apart. And even the image of Maya written in blood to me looked like the A was written a little differently. I was convinced that was going to be a critical part of the whole thing, and it was a red herring. And I kept looking for a place where I could put that down. And like with Day of the Tentacle, that is not the way to play, sort of visual novel or adventure game. Right. Instead, you have to be receptive to what the game is asking you.
What they're handing. Yeah, I thought that note would have been more too, because there was actually a fingerprint, a mini fingerprint thread that Edgewood brought up or something, and I thought, okay, they're going to go on the fingerprint. Awesome, we're going to get the fingerprints from the blood, because obviously Red White was the one that put it, used his finger to do it. So it's like, okay, we got his finger, but then they quickly like shove that off, and then eventually that the receipt ended up being more important than the Maya painted in blood. So yeah. I mean, I guess red herrings exist for a reason. So
that is true. I guess I gave you an email too, right? Yes.
Yes. Subject is Star Wars Republic Commando interviews and Kingdom Hearts 3D by Sam Thomas, from Sam Thomas. Hi, Brett and Tim. Thank you for taking the time to add to the historical record by doing all those interviews. Though I must admit, there were a few times when I looked at my podcatcher and thought, really? More Star Wars Republic Commando? I was always glad.
I mean, come on, guys. The game's not that good.
Yeah, exactly. I was always glad that I listened to them. I think the one where you interviewed each other was my favorite. The most self-indulgent one. Great. I'm an armchair game dev and really got a lot out of the show, especially the interviews. We were also at the start of Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, but we recently buckled down and finished it. Brett hasn't mentioned this, but I think he may have bounced off of the beginning of this game. You guys talked about the text dump tutorials in Star Wars Republic Commando, but KH :DDD, I'm going to read it out that way from now on, takes this to a whole new level. During the first 2 hours, you just get bombarded with screen after screen after screen, and then flashbacks, tutorials, etc. It's a worse new player experience than the first game, and I definitely had a few Tim moments, quote unquote. Is this game bad? Yeah, I think, yeah. If you can get past the first handful of hours, the core gameplay is quite fun. And while it seems like nothing story-wise is happening during the game, the end does give you some nice story stuff leading up to one moment in particular that made it all worth it. although this moment may actually have been in Birth by Sleep, a fragmentary passage. Is that the okay?
That's right. Yep.
Then repeated in Kingdom Hearts 3! Exclamation points. Oh my goodness. What a crazy series, he says. Brett, I hope you can work this one back in and finish out the series. And remember, there's no shame in watching the YouTube movie edit and then skipping the next game to the next game. Sam. Birth by Sleep, a fragmentary passage. Great. Yes, that's another title. Okay. That's where Death by Sleep comes from, I guess.
I liked that one a lot, actually. That was the one where you basically played the same story 3 times from 3 different characters' point of view.
Well, see, Sam said you got to get back in there. Go, you can do it.
I know.
For all of us.
Well, when my brain is working again, when my eyes in particular are working again, I may give that another stab. I do remember there being kind of a lot at the start of the game. It was like I can't remember the name of the first GBA game, Kingdom Hearts game, that was in that PS4 package, where it's a card playing mechanic.
Yeah.
And there's a whole set of cards that I thought were like passive upgrades to my deck. But no, there's a button you're supposed to press to switch to the other side of your deck, which is these other character cards. Like you can find these different characters and enemies and whatever and put them in the deck as well, but you have to switch to them and play them separately. And they do different basically buffs, like, oh, now, such and such cards will do more damage or whatever. I thought it was just passive because there was so much stuff in the tutorial of that game that it taught me that. In fact, when I started playing it over, I was like, maybe I'll try to do the expert, play. Even though this game was really, really hard at the end. Well, the reason why it was really, really hard, Brett, was there's a whole mechanic that you missed.
So you still finished it without even using that?
I finished it without ever using that mechanic, but it involved getting really, really player skill wise good, of being able to to know exactly what the cards were and play them in the order that I wanted to play them, like quickly and stuff. So it became a thing where my player skill got actually really, really good at just playing the half deck that I was playing with. There was one battle in particular where I was like, I don't know how I'm ever going to beat this. And I was even changing out some of those cards in the other half of the deck that I wasn't using to be like, I wonder, maybe I need this passive thing. I did at some point. I actually was thinking about writing a blog post at one point about it, of just like, okay, we need to talk about tutorials, and how you tutorialize your giant, JRPG, because you can't cram it all in, because you don't get a lot of those cards at the beginning anyway. So it's like, well, I don't really need to know that right away. I don't need it.
The whole game has to be built around the tutorial, basically.
Exactly. You have to really extend that out, and you just need to also put the on-screen prompts to remind you that you can do this thing. There were a number of mechanics in that card-based game that I just totally missed, and had to figure out from play. As I was playing, oh, you can combine the cards in these ways. Wow. I literally had to figure that stuff out again, because it just was addressed once in the tutorial, and then it's like, well, we assume you know it now. It was in the tutorial. It's like, oh my God. I think these things would have been in the manual, but I was playing in this, 15 years on compilation, on the PS4, so I didn't have that, right? There was no book. Anyway, yeah, I think I will get back to it at some point, Sam. So thanks for pushing. But it'll have to be once my eyes are a little bit dealing with this issue.
Yeah, I had an episode yesterday playing Ace.
Yeah, I've been having to play that one in kind of bursts. Anyway,
we're a mess.
We are a couple old guys here. All right, so final email. The subject is Phoenix Wright's cross-examinations, which are something we'll actually probably talk about more next time, from Walker Farrell. We've talked about him a little bit here. Hello, Tim and Brett. I'm excited to play through the Phoenix Wright cases with you, as this is a game that never fully registered on my radar in its heyday. I've been pleasantly surprised how much fun I'm having so far. In particular, I'm impressed by the cross-examination system, to the degree that I'm left wondering why more games haven't taken cues from it in their own dialogue engines, particularly RPGs. For years, I've been almost rotely choosing lines based on a moral alignment I'm trying to build, Mass Effect, Fallout, or choosing the verbose option that indicates my high social stats, Planescape Torment, Divinity Original Sin, or trying to psychoanalyze NPCs to decide which option is going to sit best with them and get me the most, quote, points, SMT and Persona. Shin Megami Tensei for you, Tim. During cross-examinations in Ace Attorney, you get access to several lines of dialogue at once, and you can engage with any of those lines at any time in any order. Interestingly, you pull from the same set of, quote, responses regardless of which line you're responding to. Oh, that's a good point. You can challenge the line, or you can present a piece of evidence from your collection. Even though it's in the service, as far as I can tell, of a wholly linear narrative, it feels engaging and granular in a way I've rarely experienced in game dialogue, and highly rewards paying attention to the arc of the conversation and putting the pieces together myself instead of living line by line and letting the characters do it for me. I'm also finding myself more interested in using the resources I have to get the result I want, rather than obsessively trying to fill out every dialogue tree and make sure I didn't miss any lines. I'm curious why RPGs have stuck to the same basic formula of a new set of tailored responses for each new line of dialogue, instead of taking a cue from Phoenix Wright and opening up the system somewhat. Thanks, and be safe. Walker. Yeah, I have some thoughts. You got any thoughts on that?
No, I think he makes a good point that it is funny that it hasn't been used more. The only thought that comes to me on his question about why more don't use it is, to be honest, like, I think that the storytellers want to tell a specific story in a certain way, and making the dialogue choices more exhaustive than, or exhaustible, if that's a word, than giving you sort of like that other axes to kind of delve into. It's just a different kind of mentality on storytelling, which I agree with him should be explored at least and done, because I think it would push back, kind of counter a little bit on the more traditional linear RPG storytelling, but it would probably reveal something fresh and new, even though you would leave the linearity behind to some degree. I think it's more interesting. I also think that it might require a story that relates a little bit more to mystery, or sort of like trying to figure something out, versus usually in dialogue trees and RPGs, you're not really trying to figure something out. You're really just trying to kind of, either role play or exhaust all of the options, or, gain information. Right. You're not really trying to solve something. But those are random thoughts as you were reading.
Yeah. Hold it. I had to do it once. Okay. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I also think that when you list those games in particular too, like, there's two things that I see there. One is they're definitely coming directly from a D&D tradition, which has, when it comes to dialogue, typically you're having like an acting session between, DM and players that they're trying to replicate. So that's one thing I think is happening there. But also, just like, I think a lot of these games that he mentions in particular are in pursuit of a sort of verisimilitude of the experience of, like, oh, if you were having a conversation with a person, you would, whatever.
Yeah,
rather than
linear.
Huh?
Dialogue is linear.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that it would build off of what you knew and all of those things. So that's one thing. Another thing is that, like the old Ultima games, for example, do something more like what Ace Attorney does, which is you're in this kind of more abstract story space, in the sense of like, well, what the options are, and you interact with it. Because these games were parser-based for the conversations, you literally had a prompt that you were saying, most notably to like anybody you'd meet, you'd say name and then job. And in the later ones, I guess what would happen is they would, as they said things, there would be lines, there would be words that would stand out that you could ask more about.
Yeah.
And so you were kind of just in the story soup space, of like, well, what words do I know that people might have opinions about? Like, And they tended to make that pretty local, like within a town or a building. Like if one person said something about, the jester or something, so other people might have opinions about the jester. But if you went to some town across the map, they probably wouldn't. So there was some sort of co-location of that information. The other thing, and the final thing I would say, is that I do believe that there are, there are indie games that are exploring this space. There almost always are, and I'm sure I'm not remotely familiar with all of them, even in the slightest. But I do remember, and I can't remember the name of it, so bad on me. But I didn't research this before reading this question. Where you basically have a set of information that you're carrying, almost like an inventory, that are the things that you can ask about.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of not that dissimilar from Ultima, where of course in Ultima, you can ask about anything anytime, but your inventory is basically what you've written down on a notepad next to you, typically, right? So, your inventory of topics is kind of what you've found in the world that you might talk about and what you've written down to remember to ask about. So that's definitely a thing that I know I've specifically seen a game that experiments with that. I think I saw something similar with a game that did a similar thing with verbs, that you literally were carrying around verbs that you could do to the world. So it was kind of a different sort of adventure game. I don't think that was dialogue heavy specifically, but it was another way to kind of look at these concepts. So yeah, I think you're just kind of moving into a more abstract story space in some sense at that point, like literally with the scrolling back and forth and having all the stuff that you could try, basically kind of takes more adventure gamey stuff. And yeah, I'd love to see more of it explored. So I appreciate bringing that up.
Yeah, I feel like it takes, like, if dialogue is inherently linear, and that's, scripts, a dialogue script is kind of what these dialogue trees tend to be focused on. And like you said, when D&D, it's sort of a conversational improv that is going to naturally have to be linear because it's two people talking. It would be interesting to see what if dialogue wasn't linear, and what if time wasn't linear, right? Because if you could go backwards in a conversation like you can in this interface in Phoenix Wright, then maybe that's the theme that's somehow related to the way the game is designed. So you know what I mean? So you can actually kind of like scrub back and forth, is the way I described it when we talked about it pre-show. Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. I do like it, and I think that I can see why they did continue making more of these, because I think they did hit upon something that is pretty unique.
Yeah, I will also say, and this is a thing that I bring up, whenever we talk about RPGs, is that the move to voice, and this is true generally of games, does make this that much harder, because if you're listening to things out of order, then the voice performance can lose coherence. Mm-hmm. So, when people are acting these things out, they're not expecting that they're acting them out to be done in any random order, that there's some sort of progression. Even in a D&D session, you have the availability of, like, asking for more information, and somebody like the DM maybe trying to say something a different way, so that they present information to you that you might, or based on a die roll or something like that. A lot of that isn't even available, period, even at AAA levels, because there's just so much text in a big RPG already, that to add huge variations on everything might be prohibitive. But yeah, so that just generally adds complication, and this is a text-based game where there's, a handful of things actually literally said, and most of it is just stuff that you're reading, which I'm happy with, but is not always the case. So people don't read anymore, right? People don't read the games.
Nope, it's true.
It's always about how do we skip past the reading.
Yeah, don't get Reed started on voiced RPGs. Reed Knight, a friend of the podcast and friend of ours, we have a debate about it all the time. Because he actually, I don't want to speak, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think his general summary is, it's like, missing the days when you have so much flexibility with just written dialogue and written words, and what everyone can do with it. And you always gave that example from the Ralston, right? Ken Ralston.
Yeah, Ken Ralston talked about that with
the flexibility of it. But I think, anyway, there's a certain charm that I think Reed misses, from having, it's reading a book versus watching a movie or something, right? It's like creating the voice in your head and in the way that is more interesting to him.
Yep. No, I agree. I mean, and of course, I think that also comes down to when I started playing games, right? And the type of games I started playing.
Him as well. Yeah.
And he's the same. Yeah. He's an Infocom fan from way back as well. So, I mean, he and I both just have that history of like being used to and particularly enjoying the reading interface of games, and we even had, I can never remember his name, the guy from Andromeda, what we interviewed.
Andromeda?
Yes, Sierra.
Mark Crow. Mark Crow.
Yes. Yeah. That he had said, that you lost something when you lost the parser,
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. You lost something when you went to voice, right? As developers, we lost something for sure because of the timelines for locking down voice. And then especially localization as well. If you're going to localize voice recording, that pushes it back even further.
The good old Jurassic Park effect.
Yep.
We're so worried about whether we should do something. We don't think about whether we.
Yeah.
Oh no,
that's a problem. Yep.
All right.
You know what they say: money will find a way. All right. Well, that's the end of the email for this week. Thanks so much for those to devgameclub@gmail.com. We appreciate the email. I love to have it. I respond to everything. Very rarely do we not read something out of the cast, but I do reply to everything we get. So thank you. Keep them coming. Okay, well, that's it for our show. We're going to play another case for next week. I think the original game in this was 4 cases, and the 5th case is a DLC thing. We'll kind of make that call when we get there, but I think that's the case. That's probably the wrong way to say that. But yeah. But we will continue on with that.
So we're just going to do one more case.
We're going to do one more case for this next week, and then I think it'll be one more after that, and we'll be done.
Okay.
I think it's going to be 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think that sounds appropriate for this one.
Yeah, it sounds about right. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com and at Twitter at devgameclub, or you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
I was recently streaming on twitch.tv/Brett Duville, but I've had to take a little break. As I alluded to earlier, I've been having an issue with my eyes and eye strain. So I will get to that when I can. Just follow and you'll get the notifications, I guess. Thanks for your patience. You probably will not see me be playing Phoenix Wright as a result, just because I have to take a lot of breaks. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton and commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Everts. Thanks so much for joining us. Have fun throwing objections at the judge and jury this week, and good night.
Good night.